welcome to the MAPS Canada webinar series, Examining the Psychedelic Renaissance, Season 2. My name is Shannon Smedella, and I'm your host for the series and a volunteer with MAPS Canada. And I just want to say again that it's been such a pleasure hosting both Season 1 and Season 2 for the series. And it's been even more of a pleasure getting to know each and every one of the speakers and these amazing leaders in the psychedelic renaissance. So if you can believe it or not, we are in episode 13 of season 2 of our webinar series, and 2 episodes left after today. So each of these speakers and panels will be showing up to share important information and their take on the psychedelic renaissance. At MAPS Canada, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, we're on the forefront of conducting studies to develop psychedelics into safe and legal medical treatments since our formation, and to conduct and publish scientific research and education supporting the beneficial use of psychedelic medicines. MAPS Canada, as you know, relies on public donations and fundraising initiatives. The funds raised from this webinar series will go to fund this research. So thank you again for being here, because your investment makes a difference. And to view what MAPS is up to, you can check out the website at mapscanada.org or maps.org. A special thank you again to all of our volunteers and sponsors that have stepped up to help as well. And if you haven't accessed those amazing perks, the perks are also available. We will put the link in the chat. And the password is psilocybin. It's our keyword for today. So we're going to start off with a special guest. We have Spencer Hawkswell with us today. And after that, we're going to do a Q&A session. So make sure and pop your questions in the chat there. Or actually in the Ask a Question, and vote up your questions, and then let us know where you are tuning in from. We have Vancouver, London, New York. We have Ontario, Nova Scotia, BC, Arizona, Victoria, Toronto, Guelph, all over the place here, North Vancouver, and Santa Cruz. Thanks for tuning in again today, guys, for season 13. So let's talk about our guest here for a second. Spencer was first introduced to healing psychological trauma with altered states of consciousness and therapeutic psychedelics from reading the work of Terrence McKenna, Rick Strassman, and Carl Jung, and believes that these methods need to be treated seriously by governments and institutions. Spencer believes that responsible drug policy requires effective organization and leadership, and is dedicated to bringing together the experts and advocates to facilitate change that results in increased access to compassionate care, harm reduction, and treatment options for those in need. Psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy is a reasonable treatment option for palliative patients in end-of-life distress, and is where we need to begin. So today we have CEO of Theracell, Spencer, will be joining us and is here right now. And we're going to talk about psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy as a treatment option. So welcome, Spencer.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited for this.
Thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to start off with a little bit of a interview session here, and I'm going to quiz you on a few things. And while we're doing that, if our guests and viewers here have any questions, again, just pop them in the Ask a Question. It can be based on what we're chatting about, or it can be an absolutely just new question that you want to ask Spencer. So anything you've been dying to ask him, pop it in the chat, because we have him here for an hour and a half. So I'm going to start off, Spencer, just by asking you if you can start off by telling us a little bit about Therasil, its history, and how it came to be.
Absolutely. So Theracil was founded by Bruce Tobin, and he's Dr. Bruce Tobin, who many of the folks here may have seen all over our social media channels. Bruce was working with a team of clinicians out here in Victoria in 2016, and they were quite intrigued by how cannabis had been legalized in Canada, and decided to try and go about a Section 56 application, again, the same applications that were used to get AIDS and terminal cancer patients access to cannabis back in the early 2000s, they wanted to try and do the same thing to replicate the studies that have been done at Johns Hopkins, NYU, and UCLA. So they wrote one of these Section 56 applications to the Canadian government, and put it to them with a reasonable request that they can essentially replicate the exact protocols that were used in these studies to help people in Canada who at the time and still today actually have the right to die with medical assistance in dying. So the question would be, why wouldn't they have the right to try something like psilocybin for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy? So this application had kind of sat, didn't really move for about 3 years. And it was in September of 2019 when I saw that Bruce had been working on this, and I had a bit of knowledge about how advocacy had worked back in the early 2000s for cannabis patients. And I just messaged Bruce out of the blue and asked him if he needed some support with Theracell to get these exemptions approved. And he messaged me saying, I'm taking off to Mexico in a week. He goes there and does some kiteboarding, but said, absolutely, I'd love to chat with you. So 2 days later, jumped in the car and drove up to Victoria from Toronto. And we hit it off and decided that this needed more attention, and that the times were changing. I think that was right when there was a large debate going on about medical assistance in dying that was to be planned for June this past summer. So we thought that the timing was right, that the research coming out of the psychedelics space was also ripe, and that right now was the right time to find patients and support them with Theracil. So we worked for a couple months on creating the nonprofit, putting together a team, a board, some advisors. And in January of 2020, so the beginning of this year, we have formally adopted what Theracil's mission and vision would be. And the mission and vision we decided on was broken down into 4 categories for the mission. The first was we would provide and advocate for access to psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for those in medical need, any Canadian in medical need. The second is we would create a psilocybin training program to help educate healthcare professionals about psilocybin and how to best use it. The third is we would do public education to help educate the public on the merits and limitations of psilocybin, and we believe that that is our responsibility. And fourth, we wanted to help in research and the evaluation of research. So we built out the nonprofits, and it was incorporated in, I think, May of 2020. And about at the same time, we had 3 patients that we had been working with, and decided to create Section 56 applications for them. So to scrap the old application and put together new ones, and to really hit hard on advocacy and raise those patient voices, and to better understand and work with the government how we can make Section 56 a fantastic piece of legislation to help so many people get access to cannabis back in the 2000s, how we could make that applicable to psilocybin. And after, I think it was 104 days of advocacy, we got access to psilocybin on August 4th. And that was really when we realized that Theracil was going to work as an organization, a nonprofit, I'll say too. And since then, we've kind of been growing and adding more members to our team, and increasingly becoming focused on things like training, and furthering access to other patients. I think as of today, we've got about 14 patients access to psilocybin to treat their end-of-life distress.
Wow, that all sounds amazing. And that's really how it starts, is just with an idea and people who are motivated to make it happen. And that kind of leads into my second question, which you already sort of touched on, was, how did you get involved with Theracil and its important work? But maybe you can elaborate a little bit, and, you can say why, and also, how did you get involved in the psychedelic space and this whole renaissance that we're in as well?
Absolutely. So I think I've mentioned it before, and it was in my bio. One of the books I read very early on in my childhood, at summer camp, I found this book on a shelf, Food of the Gods by Terrence McKenna. And I just read through that entire thing. It was so quick, faster than any other book. I found it incredibly amazing. And at the time, it's funny that I didn't really know if it was real or not, but I certainly carried it with me and thought just that that psychedelics were something that just had to be explored, and that kind of followed me into university, like most other people my age. Getting into cannabis in university just before it was legalized, and during its legalization kind of opens up a new understanding that's a lot of these drugs that we were told are bad and just nothing but bad news actually have some really therapeutic properties. And I certainly found some of those therapeutic properties with cannabis, and absolutely the same with psilocybin. So I think it's interesting that much of the propaganda you're told is this is, a dangerous substance, addictive. It'll make you do crazy things. And you take it and you find that it's an incredibly special event, a life event, and changes you in very profound ways, and for the better, I must say, absolutely for the better. Really changed my outlook on it. And I think at that same time, when I was graduating university in 2017, was when a lot of this research was coming out from Johns Hopkins, NYU, UCLA. So I was naturally attracted to that too. Now, I didn't get too involved in the psychedelic space. I actually wanted to become a psychologist and was preparing myself to go to school for psychology. After taking some time off and doing a bit of studying and some traveling, I kind of came to the assumption that I didn't want to do that, that what I had learned in school, which was more organizational management behavior, was more important to me, that I'd rather work with teams. And so coming back from my travels in summer of 2019, I immediately went to work and started thinking about what I would do to try and contribute to the ever-growing field of psychedelic science and medicine. And that kind of brings me to a point of doing research every day and seeing Bruce Tobin's application, reading about it and going, I got to message this guy, because this is it. Psilocybin and getting access through Section 56 is the way that that we bring it into the Canadian healthcare system. Something I should mention too is my mom worked at a hospital in Toronto in mental health and addictions, and I think from a very young age I remember sitting around the dinner table talking about mental health and addictions and about the role of the Canadian healthcare system in trying to help people, and how so often we see a lot of patchwork because it's unfortunately some of the best work we can do, when in reality we need to give people the tools to become resilient and to help themselves. So I just saw this as a gateway to creating a system where people can perhaps stop focusing so much on medications that are simply a patch or simply a suppressant, and actually work to heal people. And I certainly see that as what Theracil is doing. And I think to this day we realize as a team that what we're providing here is in some cases a cure to people, or a set of skills, or a new outlook on life that doesn't need to be supplemented with medicine. And that just goes to the one-time use of psilocybin and its efficacy. I think that this is what Canada and what the scientific community should be focused on, is new novel treatments like psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy to deal with conditions that before were completely untreatable, or at least weren't very effective. And that's kind of where it brings us to the present moment.
Mm-hmm. And I love those words, and actually work to heal people. Those are very important words. And I think if our system could eventually, fall into that, that would just be amazing. So it's great work that you're doing, and we're going to talk about the work that you're doing. But I just want to make a note, that must have been some summer camp that had a book.
I probably shouldn't name it, but...
So let's talk a little bit about some notable progress that Theracil has made so far in this past year, because there has been some notable progress. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So to start off, the first bit of progress that we really made was these exemptions on August 4th for 4 palliative Canadians. And that was both the work of the clinical team, but mostly it was the work of the patients. It's an incredibly difficult thing, I would imagine, to be diagnosed with a terminal illness and then to be brave enough and feel empowered enough to stand up to your government and say, I want access to something like psilocybin. It's not easy. It's not easy making videos while you're going through chemo. But we have 2 amazing, patient advocates, Thomas Hartle and Lori Brooks, who it was an absolute pleasure working with, and I still speak with them to this day. And it was really them putting their story out there, their current health condition to all of Canada, and being vulnerable and exposing kind of some of the difficulties that they face, both for them and their families. That is what changed, I think, a lot of public opinion, and specifically the opinion of our government and Patty Haiju and Health Canada, and allowed for these exemptions to be passed. So it was an incredible moment in Canadian history, I think, for 2 people at the end of their life to essentially stand up to a government and say, this is our right. And they've done that amazing work, and it's really helped a lot of Canadians. And I think it's going to continue to help a lot of Canadians get access to psilocybin. So right away, that was, I think, one of the major accomplishments, and certainly an accomplishment for Patty Haiju as well, our Honourable Minister of Health. That's got to be a difficult decision to make, because Canada is on the world stage in some sense, and it certainly you need to be able to justify your actions and also be confident that it's the right decision, because these decisions impact millions of Canadians. So right there, that amount of advocacy and collaboration with doctors, therapists, patients, and government, I think, was the first serious the first serious accomplishment that Theracil achieved, and quite frankly, that includes the patients and doctors and everyone involved. And so naturally, as an organization, the next one we had to kind of fight and reckon is, the laws themselves around psilocybin could have changed on August 4th, and if it had become legalized, there may not have been the impact that we want as a country. It may have taken many years, and I'll explain what I mean. Is when I was first starting at Theracell, I went to go meet up with a psychiatrist who runs a Toronto hospital, and I asked him, would you be interested in supporting a patient, in advocating for them and supporting them on a Section 56? And he just said, absolutely not. And it's not that he didn't believe in it. It was that, many physicians and psychiatrists, they're not even supporting patients for cannabis, and it's 2020, and it's been legalized for 20 years. And so that really got me thinking, well, what's the issue here? The laws are changed. This is legal. Why isn't it happening? And I was a bit more naive then, that there's a community of practice in the medical realm, and in order to make this something that healthcare practitioners are willing to deliver to their patients, no matter how much their patients want it, the healthcare practitioners are part of that system, and they need to be comfortable and confident delivering these substances. So to say that we've created access is not enough. To change the laws is not enough. We needed to find a way to get people trained, and I think MAPS has done an incredible job of this. They've got some pretty audacious goals to train quite a few therapists. And so that was inspiration for our group too. We realized that if we want to make a real change in Canada, we've got to get these exemptions to doctors and therapists, so that those doctors and therapists have the tools they need to go out there and help patients. Because it became incredibly evident after August 4th with the amount of emails that were coming in from people who needed support and wanted support, that our small team was completely ill-equipped to support all of the Canadians who want access, and that true medical access in Canada would not be achieved until a couple thousand therapists, doctors, nurses, counselors, social workers, so on are trained in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, and it does require training. So we advocated heavily for that as well for over 170 days, I believe, and it was early December 4th perhaps, that the minister granted those exemptions as well, which is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. It goes beyond just enshrining the rights, a patient's rights to their medicine. It goes well beyond that to understanding a system, a complex system that involves the healthcare practitioners, and getting them access so that those healthcare practitioners can provide the absolute best services to their clients, the best psychotherapy. So I believe that achievement is just as great, or if not an equally important accomplishment, is getting patients access. And again, it was those patients and those doctors and therapists that advocated for that. And it was the incredible folks at the Exemptions Office in Health Canada and Patty Haiju, and all of the MPs that worked with us too, such as Hetty Fry out here in Vancouver, Alistair McGregor, Elizabeth May, Paul Manley, Nathaniel Smith. I keep naming them. Amazing, amazing MPs who stood up for these patients and doctors and said, "Minister, listen to this. They've got something going here. The research supports it." And so I really think those two accomplishments are what is going to set us up for an amazing 2021 to get a lot more patients treated by essentially training and working with a lot of healthcare professionals.
That is super important and such great accomplishments. I know you had so many of us cheering you on along the way and sharing your posts and helping with that. But it's advocating for the cause, right? And you guys did such an amazing job at that. So congratulations on that, and that'll change a lot of people's lives going forward. So for the people on the call who aren't aware of what psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy is, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. I like to start with the word therapy. It's Greek to heal. And so we may think of therapy as just moving to healing. But around like the 1960s, there's this human potential movement and this idea, and I hinted upon it earlier, of not merely just healing people and doing patchwork, but we want to move to well-being, to this beyond healing, right, to growth. And so that's where we start hearing about, and people may be familiar with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and self-actualization. Is that there are actually needs there, and that the therapy, and specific psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, goes beyond just healing an individual and fixing something, and actually allowing them to grow. And I say healing in the instances of patients who are coming to Theracell for treatment and for therapy. It's usually healing from the tyranny of negative emotions that come with, an end-of-life diagnosis. And that is in the form of end-of-life distress, which is this combination, sometimes a nasty combination, of demoralization, hopelessness, despair, depression. And again, we want to take that and we want to change it into growth, both emotionally, cognitively, and behaviorally. So that can be replaced, and this is where myself, I'll also let everyone know I'm not a clinician. I simply like to read about this and speak quite a bit with our clinical staff. But psilocybin is really just an aid to these therapies, of which there are many therapies. So one therapy may be logos therapy, and the idea being that if a person has a strong meaning, a will to live, that they can overcome just about anything. And this was, for example, developed by Viktor Frankl, where he found that even in Holocaust concentration camps, if someone had a strong enough will to live and meaning, that they could overcome any tyranny. So certainly, if you can overcome physical and real life tyranny from other people, you can overcome some of these struggles that you may deal with yourself. So psilocybin can be applied as an aid to therapy. That's why we call it psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy. So in the instance of how this might work, there are a whole bunch of, think of like a human mind as having all of these defenses. And these defenses sometimes create repressed emotions or feelings. repressed or suppressed. And what psilocybin can do is it can actually relax you, and it can make you more open. So we have, for example, some patients that we've worked with that are stuck on one thing in their life, and it may be, I hate that I was given this diagnosis. I hate this thing that happened to me. I hate this person. I hate. And that is almost like a loop that is running in their mind all of the time. And it's incredibly difficult to deal with talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, or any of the host of therapies out there. So when we look at how psilocybin may help, it actually puts them into an altered state of consciousness where those normal loops that keep playing and those defenses that keep them replaying this loop are relaxed. And for the first time in a long time, they can sit back and look at this loop of thought that's been ruling their life in a new frame of mind. And it can turn, I hate this, I hate that, into I accept this, I forgive that person, I understand this. And that may seem easy to, many people who on a daily basis have something, maybe horrible or terrible happen to them and get past it. But not everyone can do that, especially when it's a incredibly horrible thing or an incredibly traumatic event that caused that loop of thought. And so cognitively, this is where, Carhart Harris, for example, has done an incredible amount of work, and is essentially has shown that it relaxes belief systems. And it's these belief systems, right, that are often betraying a person and leading to anxiety, negative emotions and feelings. And of course, in the body too, right? Therapy goes beyond just, talk therapy. It can actually be body work. So sometimes people are incredibly tense, and there are these holding patterns. Maybe they're shaking or twitching, and your body can hold a lot of stress and anxiety. And even with a hero dose of psilocybin, and sorry, I got ahead of myself here. When we're talking about psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy and the work we're doing, we're talking about one session with a hero dose of psilocybin, usually about 3 to 7 grams of psilocybin is what many of our patients have been taking, which is a lot of psilocybin. And it's enough to put you in a seriously altered state of consciousness. But in that state, that's when you start realizing these changes and letting your defenses and systems down, changing loops of thought, relaxing belief systems, and sometimes even relaxing your body and realizing that you've been carrying an incredible amount of stress and anxiety, maybe even in your shoulders, and that for the first time, you can relax. And your body can understand that you need to be relaxed, and that's better for you. So we've seen all of these examples in many of the patients that have been treated by folks like Bruce. And so to cap it off with a little anecdote is one, I can give you one from both Thomas and Lori, two of the patient advocates who've gotten this therapy. Thomas talks about his cancer before his psilocybin journey, like being dragged by a horse towards a cliff, and you're not in control, and certainly you can imagine that's incredibly anxiety provoking and painful, and not a good place to be. And so after the psilocybin journey, that horse is still heading, is still taking him a place perhaps he doesn't want to go, but he's now in control. He's now the rider, and that's better, right? And it's a profound thought, an archetype of thought to be able to put yourself in control of a horse. And similarly with Lori, I think she was saying that, before the thought of cancer would come out anytime, and it would just be all around her, almost like this fog in her life. And after the psilocybin journey, she could put it into a box, and it would stay in that box, and she put it there, and it might come out once in a while, but being able to put it back in that box is enough, to make life livable. And those tools may sound simple, or those ways of internalizing your cancer may sound simple, but they're incredibly healing to these patients. And so that's to us what the psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy is, and the help that's being given to these patients is it's aiding them in much of the work that these therapists are already doing with them, or that they know they need to do. It's being used as a tool, helping
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. That's absolutely profound. And it sounds like a tool that, every single person could benefit from using. So how would someone qualify right now to receive therapy?
So at the moment, you can check on our website. We've got a pretty simple inclusion criteria. We are helping palliative Canadians who've been given a end-of-life diagnosis or a serious diagnosis, potentially life-threatening, and also those who are in remission from a potentially life-threatening diagnosis. We're looking for folks who have tried other types of therapy without the result they want. People that have access or potential access to psilocybin and want to be involved in something like this. So right now we are really focusing on palliative Canadians and those who are in remission for a number of reasons. One is that is where some of the research is the strongest. However, it's also quite clear that Health Canada is willing to expand beyond or could be willing to expand beyond palliative if we're able to. But the truth is right now, back to this conversation of not very many healthcare practitioners or not enough healthcare practitioners to deliver this therapy to patients. We've got so many emails, so many patients messaging us looking for help that right now we are essentially triaging and working with the ones who don't have much time, and that is the ones in palliative care with potentially life-threatening diagnoses. So our hope is to start expanding the pool of therapists, doctors, counselors, and nurses that can work with these patients so that we can just catch up to the number of palliative and end-of-life patients that are reaching out to us. And then from there, we can start working perhaps with other people who absolutely deserve access to this, folks who might suffer from treatment-resistant depression or addiction or suicidal ideations. But as far as being able to triage right now, this is where we need to start. And this is where the science is ready, the doctors and therapists are ready, the government is ready, and we will expand hopefully over 2021 to meet more people where they are with different indications and different reasons to want psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy.
So you need more health professionals. You need more health
Absolutely.
professionals.
Absolutely. And
go ahead.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's not always as easy as just, hey, email us and we'll get you working. It's like we really need to make sure that we're both vetting healthcare professionals and providing them with the support that they need in order to do this therapy. And right now, we believe some of that biggest support is getting them access to training. So building out our training program over the next year is going to be incredibly important so that we can give them both the ability to take psilocybin themselves for training purposes so that they feel comfortable and confident to do this therapy, but also creating a support network behind them, a peer support network, so that if they ever have questions, that they can take it back to their community and ask those questions and continue to learn about psilocybin and its assisted psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm. Can you go a little bit deeper into the training program in case we have some of those health professionals that are watching right now that might be intrigued or interested in going
Absolutely.
further? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We've had a ton of interest since the beginning of December, and it's great, but we also feel like it's overwhelming too. There's so many people that want access, and we're really just at the point where we're kind of like, oh my gosh, we've gotten this access we've been fighting for 170 days. That's incredible, but now there's also a ton of work to be done with that too. So we're just finishing up building the online portion of the training, much of the didactic work that's been broken down into 11 different learning objectives. And much of that is being borrowed from a ton of the education that's been done both by MAPS and organizations like CIIS, and just the best practices in collaboration with our scientific partners. So we feel quite confident on building out the didactic portion. Our hope is to have something ready to launch by late January of 2021, so that people can start learning online But after that, we'll also have to make sure we have a system that works for delivering the experiential sessions. And that obviously is going to be limited by a number of factors. And so one of those factors might be COVID, right? What do we do in a time of COVID when it's incredibly difficult to put a bunch of doctors and therapists and healthcare practitioners to fly them all over, Canada to one spot to do experiential training with a substance that might just be unsafe for some of those people. So there are ways around that. We're confident we'll find those ways. What exactly they are right now, we're not exactly sure. Another issue is we're not sure yet if Health Canada is going to extend these, and Minister Haiju is going to extend these exemptions to more doctors and therapists and healthcare practitioners. They've given it to 16 as of today. We've got hopefully another 3 more, coming in, but they may want to wait. They may wait and say, let's see how the first round turns out before we allow any more of these exemptions. There's just too many unknown variables right now to speak with complete confidence about when we'll have a training program and how soon many of these healthcare professionals can apply for training. It's also going to be incredibly difficult for our small team to do this alone. So I think we need to start looking at partnerships who we can work with to get this training done. And really, at the end of the day, if the bottom line is to get healthcare practitioners trained, it's a fine balance between just handing out exemptions, letting people do psilocybin, and also providing, a system that works really well to get feedback, to continuously improve it, and then provide support well after they're done the training. Because it's just such a new area. It cannot be rushed and cannot be done sloppily. It has to be done very well. So not much is known, unfortunately, at the moment. And I really hope that come later in January, hopefully even by early January, we'll at least have some more announcements. So at the moment, we've just been encouraging all of these healthcare practitioners to sign up on our website. So there is a form there that you can fill out, asks a couple things like your name, email, number, and where you are. Our hope is that we can communicate with you over the next couple of weeks as these things become more clear to us, to let these healthcare practitioners know, where they can start. And I certainly believe, and I'm sure everyone's doing it, is, start with your own readings right now, right? Like, read up on the research that's been done up until now. Read the work of Stan Groff. There's so much of this didactic that's actually out there, open in the world, that will prepare you for our training program. Because one of the things that I really am proud of in our program is there's going to be a huge online portion that's going to make this incredibly accessible to a lot of Canadian healthcare practitioners. And then we're also quite dedicated to making a system where we're actually interviewing participants before they enter the training to make sure that we're not teaching them things that they already know, and we're not, providing redundant training. So it's really meeting them where they are and creating something that can be adaptive to meet them where they are, to provide essentially and just fill the education gaps that they might have. So that's difficult, but I think we're well underway to achieving that, again, hopefully by the end of January. And we've even got a fundraiser up right now to put a full team together to make sure that we can achieve that goal. So right now, that kind of is the tip of the spear for Theracil, is this training program, and getting these questions answered as soon as possible so that we can communicate them to all of the many interested healthcare practitioners out there.
Wonderful. I'd love to talk about your fundraising initiatives as well. But before that, in regards to credentialing, are there any specific credentials that these healthcare professionals would need? Would it be like a general practitioner, psychologist, specialist, anyone in the healthcare?
So this too, we're trying to navigate. I mean, there's also the question of who is most important to train first. And so I think ideally we want to get a couple doctors, psychiatrists, and therapists trained. We'll want to also train folks who are going to go out to be trainers so that we can expand this across the provinces and territories, because we don't want this to just be something that happens in Ontario and BC. I think it's important that it expands across Canada and it's available to everyone in Canada. Whether you're up in the province or in PEI on the East Coast or Vancouver Island, you should have access. So I think creating some some system where we're training the right people first is going to be integral to an effective rollout of a training program. As for right now, who will likely be accepting, I think we've kind of fallen on an initial decision of anyone with a college behind them, a professional college, who is licensed, is ideal. I think it's just important because if there is any malpractice, it's good to have a professional body behind you who can assist in identifying and correcting for any malpractice. But hopefully we'll be able to expand. Again, right now we are starting, and the applications that have been sent out are for doctors, so like general practitioners, for psychiatrists, registered clinical counselors, psychologists, psychotherapists, and nurses. And who knows, it may expand.
Okay, perfect. That's good to know. There's a couple of questions that came up in the Ask a Question related to training. And there's one comment in the chat here. Melissa's wondering who do we contact to inquire about partnership collaborations to support you?
So you can just send me an email at spencer@theracil.ca, or reach out to info@theracil.ca. But yeah, if you'd like to partnership, then I think just sending a message to me would be the best idea.
There you go. Super easy. So we have a question here from Dr. Keaton Patel. Can you, and this, you already mentioned that you don't have all of the information, but he asked, can you share how many practitioners will complete their psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy training with Theracell by the end of 2021? So maybe if you have a goal, if you were to foresee.
So, unfortunately, it'd be irresponsible of me to set that goal without the full backing of my training team. We're really hoping to get to that goal soon and to make it public, because absolutely goals are important. We need something high and something hard to shoot for, to aim for, because if we do that, that's how we're gonna get to where we need to be. So it would be my goal to have a couple hundred therapists and doctors trained by the end of 21. Whether or not that will be possible, I will need to go back to my team and we'll need to figure out what is possible. Again, it'll also have to be reconciled with what is possible with COVID, vaccinations, and what the government is ready for, because we have to remember we still can only move at the pace that the federal government is prepared to move at. So while I can have audacious visions and goals, it's not always just as easy as getting the right people and then just pulling it off. There's a lot of variables that are just unknowns at this point, because psilocybin is still Schedule J. It is still illegal. But absolutely, Dr. Patel, it's a fantastic question, and my hope is that in January we'll have that goal out. It's something I would like to do, is get that goal out, so that we've got something very tangible to aim for.
Wonderful. So what are some major obstacles that you face as a company, and what is your plan to overcome them? Or how could the people, the people watching, help?
It's a fantastic question. One of the major obstacles I certainly see is this, how do we put this? We've been a nonprofit organization right from the beginning, and that means that a lot of the people on our team, are doctors, therapists, so they're practicing elsewhere, and they've been just dedicating and donating a lot of time to Theracell. I know it may sound cliche here, but our fundraiser is absolutely what we need support with. I mean, a lot of the members in our team have been doing an incredible amount of work for free. And as we get to a point where we need to launch a training program, the amount of hours that it will take to pull that off and the amount of resources and support we're going to need is something that is not going to be best done through volunteer time. We may need positions for that. We'll need people working full time, and we'll need to compensate them because we also don't know if it's right just to continue to ask for money. We want to create a system where therapists will pay for training, and that training will then go to help build a team that will help more therapists get training, because at the end of the day, that helps doctors. It creates a market for therapists to go out there to find more patients to help, right, and to give back. So it's really about turning our nonprofit, which is yet to charge anyone for anything or really act as a training organization or a clinic, turning it into something that can grow and scale and help achieve our mission. And we really believe that this fundraising round, we're trying to raise $250,000, and we've got a fantastically generous donor who has decided to match that. So every donation you give is essentially doubled. You can look at it that way by this donor. And if we hit our goal of 250,000, we unlock the last bit. And that should be exactly what we need to launch our training program, so that we can start growing the actual clinical application of Theracil and start partnering with organizations to get this to the hundreds, or not thousands, of therapists, doctors, clinicians. We need the training so that they can deliver it to the thousands and thousands and thousands of Canadian patients who I'm sure are eager to find qualified therapists and healthcare practitioners who can help them with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy.
So important, so important. And thank you, Beth, for popping that in the chat there again, the fundraiser link. So go ahead, click on the link, donate, help support the cause. You know, if you got to spare 50,000, 25,000, $5, whatever it is, you know that it's going towards a good cause. And I know a lot of us are watching eagerly to see what's going to happen within the next year with Theracil, and just because of what you've done already to help people. So go ahead, click the link, make your donation, and fundraising is definitely something that is super important for this movement, this renaissance. And there's people who have money. So the people who have money, go ahead, click the link. And what can we do as a community? So, obviously people can donate by clicking the fundraiser link, helping support that. As you mentioned, all donations are matched, but what else can people do?
I would think that organization, and I haven't fully explored this yet, but really effective organization. I really think that some of the best or some of the most positive things that have happened in Canada, including Theracil and the creation of, even like the CPA and other groups that may have started off as, local psychedelic Facebook groups. A lot of these groups have blossomed, and they've created a place where a lot of patients, Canadian citizens, doctors, the clinicians can all come together and talk. And so the more that people communicate and express their ideas, their values, their goals, I really think it leads to the further organization of provincial, let's call them either groups or whatever they might materialize and become. That is the most important thing. So representation, on the East Coast from different groups. Right? When we can host chats like this, and more doctors and therapists can learn about psychedelics, and more patients can learn about it, then it means they go communicating to their friends and their family, and it sways public opinion. And public opinion certainly needs to change to make these substances legalized. And also, like I've been kind of harping on here, medical opinion needs to change too, because it is clinicians that should get more interested in whatever their patients are interested in, and whatever the science is interested in, and to a reasonable extent, right? We obviously don't want to force anything that's not ready, but most certainly the organization of healthcare practitioners. And for a long time, I've been chatting with different groups across Canada who, do dinners once a month, groups of doctors that do dinners, or small psychedelic societies that gather and meet to provide harm reduction to many of the people who are doing these substances and want some feedback or want some support. I think these are good things, because if you don't organize, if you don't work together, that's when mistakes can be made, and when voices aren't projected and heard. So I think that's important. I would also just say that supporting groups beyond Theracil, like MAPS, and any organization that is doing responsible work. I think supporting them and listening to them, going to events and showing that you want this to move forward is incredibly important. It's really just creating a broader community, because I think this will create the community that's needed in Canada to make us once again a global leader in psychedelic science, which is certainly something I would love to see. And I think something that Canada is right now positioning itself to be, with this access, with changes to the SAP that are being made, that are kind of setting up our country to be again a world leader in research and therapy. So things are going very well, and I would just say keep it up to everyone on this call who's obviously doing exactly that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you're so right about, working together. There's organization A, B, C, D, E, F, and, each organization has their specific reach and their specific power and leverage, but like join everyone together and you've got a huge, massive community of people working towards the same cause, right? In the Renaissance. So it's like collaboration, community, and working together. And I love that. And supporting each other, every organization is, like I said, working towards the same goal. So working together.
Absolutely. And I always kind of bring it back to like the clinical landscape, because that's what our organization does. I think that the more doctors, for example, who feel comfortable with the way they're working with patients who might want to take psychedelics, the better, because it really creates a community practice and allows doctors and therapists to support their peers with the decisions that they're making, which, as far as I'm aware, is incredibly important, and allows doctors to operate with confidence and not to be too afraid of losing their license, for example. Mm-hmm. So those communities are really important. It allows people and gives people, props them up and gives them confidence to do the work that they may want to do, which at the end of the day is up to them. And they've got a code of ethics, to do no harm and to do what is best for their patient. And so if psychedelics is best for their patient, it's best that they're not doing that alone, that they do have peers that they can reach out to ask questions if they want to, say, support a Section 56 application.
So would that be one of the obstacles or the objections that you would get from a healthcare professional, is that they are A, scared of losing their license, or, B, maybe they're not educated as much as they could be on the treatment? What kind of objections are you getting from professionals?
Well, absolutely. And it was something that we were afraid of coming in, that one of the reasons we didn't know if this would work, can we find a doctor who is willing to support folks like Thomas and Laurie, right? A doctor who's willing to go to the government and say, I'm willing to support this patient, take access to psilocybin, right? I hear, say that this is a reasonable medical choice, because that's an audacious statement. And so if we think of what was happening in early 2000s, colleges were telling doctors they were going to strip them of their licenses if they were prescribing cannabis. I don't believe that ever happened. And again, it may be an empty threat. It could happen. We don't know yet. But certainly it takes, bold and daring and confident doctors to go out there and support patients, because to say that there's absolutely no risk that's not true, right? There are risks, there are unknowns, and it's not for the timid. It's something that does require some courage to support a patient and help them. So it was something that was very scary for us, and again, where I think education is going to change that, is going to allow doctors and therapists to understand it better. Because the unfortunate truth is we can't always move at the speed of research. If everything in medicine moved at the speed of research, we wouldn't move anywhere, right? It takes doctors and therapists and researchers and clinicians and people who are willing to act courageous and take sometimes calculated risks to move things forward and to innovate. Yeah.
Well, good on all those professionals, those health professionals that are taking a stand and definitely making a difference there. And hopefully you'll see a whole lot more come in the new year as well. So I do have one other question here. Is there anything else that you want people to know about the importance of your work with Theracell and what you guys are doing over there?
Oh man, I've talked a lot. Nothing else really comes to mind right now. I would say that we are working on some research right now too, that hopefully we can make public soon. I think research is going to be incredibly important because we are in a position to add to much of the literature out there, and our hope is that we will we'll adopt the policy of open science, where we will just publish all of our research, all of our observations of what has been happening with patients, so that we can share that with different clinicians and practitioners. Because something that seems that I didn't even realize coming into this is the research that's done in the lab. They essentially control as many variables as possible. They want to know as much as they can, because that makes sense. They want to know exactly what they're testing. So in those situations, they're testing psilocybin for end-of-life distress. And so in many instances, John Hopkins' work, they were making sure that many patients didn't have pre-existing mental health conditions, that they weren't on a host of medications. And when we put this into practice in the real world, we start seeing that, well, a lot of people have pre-existing mental health conditions or have had traumatic experiences in their past, or are on a host of medications, especially at end of life. Does that mean we don't treat them? And this is where, no, you've got to take some risks, some calculated risks, and understand what sort of drug interactions there might be, and understand what might be different with someone who's dealing with just an end-of-life diagnosis and the resulting end-of-life distress versus someone who has that, but also has a traumatic experience from their past that's going to come up in that psilocybin journey. The therapist needs to understand that they're not just treating that, they're treating another thing, and they have to explore that in their sessions prior or before the session itself. And sometimes that actually requires 2 psilocybin journeys instead of 1. So we're learning a lot. There's going to be a ton of learning going on. We want to make sure that we share that with the entire community, because I forget who told me, but I love this kind of anecdote. Like, initial research is led by researchers who are willing or who are able to set up massive studies to try, say, a new drug or a new therapy or new practice. But once that's done, once the initial ground is broken, it really goes into the hands of everyday clinicians to push innovation. They're the ones who start innovating by making small tweaks and changes to the way that they're practicing, because again, there's not as many variables controlled for us. So we start realizing patterns, and I think what we're seeing now is really, it's going to be an exponential increase in the amount of research and innovation going on in the psychedelic space as it gets into the hands of clinicians, because they're going to start identifying new uses, new therapies, and new ways to treat patients. And I think that's going to be very, very positive. But again, at the same time, we got to make sure that it's also that comes with its risks too, so that we're setting up the right system for that to happen, the right support networks, because this stuff is complicated. So research is hopefully coming down the line. And again, our fundraiser, there's a portion of those funds is to put together our research team to get this started. And hopefully soon we'll be sharing a bit more on what that potential research will look like. So yeah, a bit of a teaser.
All right, perfect. So we have a few questions here down in the Ask a Question. So I'm going to head to those now. A couple are on the Section 56 exemption. So the first one is from Justin, and he says, how is the Section 56 exemption different from the Special Access Program? For approval, did you have to demonstrate the efficacy and safety of psilocybin?
So the Section 56 is part of the CBSA. It gives the minister, that is Patty Haichu, the ability to grant any persons or class of persons access to any of the controlled substances. Now, that's a fantastic piece of legislation, by the way. Whoever wrote that was a genius. Essentially, you're making sure that there is, that at no point in time a very immovable and unchangeable piece of legislation might block common sense. It allows the minister to use her ministerial authority to say, hey, this doesn't work for this person, let's change it, let's give them an exemption. And in those instances, what did we have to prove? God, it took us 3 years, to prove much of the scientific efficacy of it, to explain what sort of protocols we'd be using come treatment time and what sort of inclusion criteria we were using. It seems like there's now quite a stable working relationship with Health Canada that we've built, and it becomes a bit easier, right? And they know what sort of processes we're using. So the exemptions usually take about 10 business days now, and we're hoping we'll be able to slowly start pushing those as our team is ready to expand our mandate. But again, we want to make sure we don't do that at the cost of our fantastic protocol that we've got. So that's what Section 56 is. It's the minister's ability to grant this. Now, the SAP special access, this I know a little bit less about, but I do understand that prior to the announcement that was made by Health Canada, I believe it was last Friday, and they announced that they were going to allow for substances that were Schedule J to be used or to be accessible through the SAP. They were not for a while, which means that the SAP program that had been used to help people get access to different drugs such as AIDS medications or experimental cancer therapies, it did not work, or it was not. It did not allow people to get access to substances like psilocybin, MDMA, or heroin, say. And I believe that these changes were made by the Harper administration. I want to say that it was in response to the Naomi safe injection heroin or safe heroin supply, which at the time was a success but shut down. I think later there was an amendment made to allow for access to heroin again, but it did shut out a lot of substances such as psilocybin, and is the reason we could not use the SAP to get access to psilocybin, because it said very clearly that no, if it's Schedule J, and I believe that I don't know if it's SAP, it may be the FDR too, but also an interesting piece of information is part of the reason we can't get access to say psilocybin from a Canadian producer of synthetic psilocybin is because similarly there is a piece of legislation that says if something is Schedule J, which psilocybin is, it cannot be, the FDR cannot apply to it. And the FDR Food and Drug Regulations is the set of regulations that get or that allow for the sale, the purchase of controlled substances. So a couple changes need to be made, and I think the changes being proposed here to the SAP, which if some people haven't seen, you can look it up, SAP amendment. I think it came out last Friday, the government announced that. I would say look into that, it's quite interesting. It should help a lot of people in Canada get access to these substances. But further changes may need to be made. Regulatory changes may need to be made to allow access to substances like psilocybin, because the SAP alone is not going to fix everything. Further steps will need to be taken so that Canadians and Canadian patients and Canadian doctors and therapists in Canada who have these exemptions can get access to a safe supply in Canada, because right now, unfortunately, they still do need to get it themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Carrie asks a question here, also related, and you might have touched on this already. What is the path or transition you see moving from these Section 56 exemptions to sustained rights to have access to these treatments for depressive disorders, anxiety, and personal growth?
So I would think it would be reasonable to assume some regulations be made, similar to regulations that were made to get people access to cannabis. I think what's working right now can be turned into regulations where a patient has a doctor support an application, or just simply a doctor support, so that patient can then get medical access to psilocybin. Once they have medical access, I believe they should be able to purchase from a designated grower if they want organic mushrooms, or they should be able to get synthetic mushrooms from a pharmaceutical supplier, or they should be able to grow their own, or have a family member or a friend grow theirs. I think that these have worked incredibly well for cannabis, and we should look at what worked and see what is applicable to mushrooms, or to psilocybin, sorry. And I think that these are quite clear to the regulators, to the people who will be making these decisions. And I also think that mushrooms are different than say cannabis. So it's not something that's just going to be made tomorrow. I think it's going to grow and evolve. But it is my hope that one day we see a system where, at least what I would like to see soon, is a system where, a doctor is able to write a prescription for this, or something similar to suggest this access for a patient, and that it doesn't need to go to the highest level of government. I think a doctor is enough.
Mm-hmm. We have a comment here from Diane. She says it would be helpful to have different training tracks depending on one's background. Some of us have been doing a variation of this therapy for years. So I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that has to be talked about, right? Is there are many healthcare practitioners who have been doing this work underground for years. And so do they need to go through the whole training? And I think this is back to where I had mentioned that ours is going to be very adaptive and responsive to individuals who already have experience, whether it's in Canada or offshore somewhere else. We don't want to just, put someone through training for the sake of training. We want to actually see, and I think this is done through a number of interviews, and again, training may actually be beneficial. Who doesn't want more training? Who doesn't want the peer support network that comes with training? But yeah, we certainly want to realize that some people may have skills and proficiencies in some of these learning objectives or categories that we have. So an example is in our training program, we have one of our learning domains is palliative care considerations, because we understand that many of the people on our team, palliative care is actually new to some of them. So that will have to be taught, and it should be taught for any clinician who is wanting to do psychedelics to psychotherapy for someone who is at end of life. If you're going to be doing this work with a patient, it's pretty important that you yourself do psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, because if you are not, at peace with your own mortality, if it's something that shakes you, then what makes you think you'll be able to work with a patient who has these fears? So, what about transference? Or is that effective? So I think in many forms of psychotherapy, or many therapeutic forms, we see the practitioner going through that exact therapy themselves. And so I do think it is important that, if you've done psychedelic psychotherapy before, but you may not have done it with someone at end of life, I think it is still beneficial to go through some training, to learn a bit about how it changes. And so while we may not need to teach some other things, and while you may not need to go through all of the didactic portions because you've done that with, say, CIS or with MAPS, our hope is that we'll be able to help fill some knowledge gaps. And I think that is a successful therapy, a successful training course. That's what success looks like to us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. From James, he asks, I'm an undergraduate student. What steps can I take today to begin my career in this exciting field?
Oh man, good question. Start learning, start reading. Start reading as much as possible. Reach out. I think there's many ways to work with groups such as maybe even Theracil as an undergrad. If you need a co-op. But I would also just say that, the importance of what I was talking about before, these groups, there's probably a local psychedelic, forum or society in your area. Reach out to them. Start having conversations with folks, because there's probably a lot of people that you can learn from. And if you're in school for psychotherapy, psychology, or any form of medicine, speak to the professionals who like you have been working with this who are like you and may have been working with this substance for years, because they will be a great source for education. I certainly know that that's that's what got Therasil to where we are, is finding the folks who've been doing this, this work for years, and speaking with them, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There are a lot of people who have done this and know what the right protocols are.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we have one last question here. It's from Kate. How will you collaborate with other health professionals in the future?
I think I've already answered it, but maybe not. So I'll try and say it's like other healthcare professionals. Like, I assume that's other than the ones I've been talking about, like doctors, therapists, nurses. My hope is that it will expand we will start to expand it as we see need for it. And as these groups, for example, start communicating with us saying, hey, don't forget about us. Maybe there are some hospice volunteers or death doulas. There are so many people that are around the patients who are getting this care. And that may even be, caregivers. Perhaps, a caregiver might want to know a bit more about psychedelic psychotherapy if they're going to be the one sitting with that person in that session. Because why bring in a stranger when you can work with someone such as a hospice volunteer or a death doula who already knows this patient very well? So I think certainly being able to provide them with training and information on what psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is going to be incredibly important, and it's going to be a combination of seeing or doing this and expanding as we see need for it, but also just listening to those groups of folks. And I think this organization is important. Let us know who you are, who wants the training, because if there's a legitimate need to provide it, absolutely, either it should be provided by us or by others in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. So it looks like those are all the questions in the Ask a Question. Is there anything else you want us to know about Theracil and about the work that you're doing?
Nothing more now. Just love if anyone can donate. Please go to our fundraiser. Anything helps at this point in time. We've only got to the end of the year. I think that's almost like 15 more days. So we would love any support, or any donation that you can contribute. It really helps. And I would just say that if you're not already, sign up for our newsletter, and we will continue to communicate as much as we possibly can. We're looking to hold more webinars. We recently did a rounds in Kelowna, and my hope is that we'll make that accessible to all healthcare practitioners who are interested, and that we'll continue to do rounds like that. So 2021 is going to be a big year for us, and we're really hoping to be able to both increase our communications and also the conversations that are being had with every single person who might be interested in learning more. It's difficult. We are a small team. There's only about 4 of us working full time, but we are growing, and with your support, we can grow faster and get this to more people. So thank you very much, everyone who's been asking questions and attended this. It really means a lot.
Mm-hmm. And donate. Click the link. 2 weeks left.
Yeah.
How much more do you need to hit your goal?
A lot. I think we still need about 200,000, let's say. So 15 days, we really gotta get a lot more support. And my hope is that the holidays are a particularly generous time when the people will be able to give and donate, and hopefully we'll be able to send out a couple more communications to the people who are on our existing newsletter, to existing donors, and just on social media. So if you don't already, follow us, and we'll provide you with many opportunities to donate and to learn more about Theracell.
Mm-hmm. And you have that matching program as well. And every donation counts. It's going to a good cause, and all it takes is a few people to make some big donations, and the rest can make some average ones, and there you go. You're at your goal. So thank you so much for sharing everything that you did with us today. It's very interesting and also very exciting to see the headway that you're making, and just changing people's lives and helping people heal. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, and thank you for doing the work that you do. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Shannon, very much for inviting me and for doing this wonderful interview. Again, thank you everyone for the great questions. This has been a fantastic opportunity. Hope we get to do it again.
Absolutely. Sounds great. We'll talk to you soon, Spencer.
All right. Take care.
You too. So just a few comments before we close up here for the evening. I would like to take some time to thank again our speaker for the evening, Spencer Hawkswell. Also, thank you to all of you for being here to support this series, these speakers, this movement, this important research, this renaissance, and doing your advocating and doing what you're doing to move things forward in this important work. Also, thank you to all of our sponsors. And I'll say it again, if you haven't checked out the perks page yet, make sure and do so. We'll post that in the chat as well. Up and coming, we have our next episode on December 22nd, and we're going to be talking with Trevor Miller and Jasmine from the Canadian Psychedelic Association. So that is next Tuesday, same time. And then after that, we'll have our last episode on the 29th of December, and that is with Paul Stamets. And that'll wrap up season 2. I can't believe it's almost over. So just a reminder that all of these episodes are recorded. So if you have some time over the holidays and you want to go rewatch all of these episodes, feel free to do so. Just log back into your Crowdcast. I have watched all of them, and I think they're absolutely amazing. I think I've watched almost 30, hosted almost 30 now, and I've learned so much. So I can definitely be a voice for saying, go watch them. You'll learn so much if you just log back in and watch that Crowdcast. So thank you again to Spencer Hawkswell. Thank you again to Theracil for all of the work that you're doing. And we will see everyone next week. Bye for now.